just setting this up here for now.
No worries.
Okay, we're going live, mister.
Let's do it.
Actually, we already are live. We are live. Is that our microphone? You ready to go?
I'm good.
You might
Oh, I should probably use that, right? That looks important. I should probably put this on.
But I'll stand near you so I can be heard.
That's hilarious. There we go. I clipped this guy on right here.
We know there's at least one person, probably more, that want to see.
How's this? Is this working? Testing. 1, 2, 3.
James?
Awesome. Testing.
Churchill.
Should I clip it onto my shirt?
Churchill.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
He's got his headphones on. He can't hear
I
us.
know you can't hear us at all.
Did you hear him?
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, now it is.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Good.
Good? Awesome.
All right. I'm going to stand fairly close to him so you can hear me, Churchill. I can hear you great. Excellent. Some people have trouble hearing me.
Apparently.
Can everyone hear me tonight? No. No? Okay. me. Okay. Let me see if I can boom just a little extra then. Put more swag down. Welcome to August, everyone. Thank you very much for coming.
Woo!
Kind of warm out. A little bit warm in, but definitely better than being outside. So, we got D back. Woo!
Yeah.
That wasn't too encouraging. I mean, like.
Anyone know that he's changed since last time we saw him? Well, yeah, look at him.
Look, got a new
He's
shirt.
Batman. He's DC, not Marvel.
Okay.
Also, it's kind of weird to
Kind of
segue
announce it
there,
or
huh?
yes. How do you?
He's now Microsoft, not Intel. Woo!
Woo!
That's almost like DC and Marvel, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay, on the small chance you don't already know where to find PADNUG events and goings on. Honestly, the Slack channels are getting to be a lot more fun nowadays. Again, I want to thank, Chris and Jesse and a few others who really were like, Rich, come on, let's get on that Slack. It's been awesome. We are even streaming this tonight, not directly from the computers because we still are having connection problems. Gosh darn it. In any case,
It's all my fault.
it is not your fault at all. You had cables that worked. We have cables that don't. So that said, if you're sitting there wanting to see more later, you can go back and rewatch things on the YouTube channel later. then Meetup is really the place to go because that's where we put everything. That's where we have all of our meetings nowadays. Wi-Fi. If somehow you've missed that, you've got a few moments. I see phones going up, trying to capture it. Better yell if you want it, because I'm going, switching. What, was that it? Was that a screen capture? No. Okay. Oh, did I can go back one moment. You need it? Okay, there you go. Okay. In case, I know there's at least one person in the audience that might not totally appreciate why PADNUG exists. PADNUG started out back in 2001, in May of 2001. 3 or 4 people from Intel heard about the new technology coming from Microsoft called .NET, and they started PADNUG. At the time that was called Portland Area .NET User Group. We don't use that long name anymore because we rarely even do .NET anymore. We do. It's always at the core. And anytime we're doing the Microsoft presentation, there's probably going to be a .NET spin to it. But there's so much more from the Microsoft side nowadays, so we do that. And thanks to Intel and Darren, raise your hand, Darren. Woo! Woo! Hey, we have a great place to meet. Apparently, Rich has some paperwork to fill out to get our December meeting scheduled over in JFCC. And for the new people, especially the newest people, that December, you want to be there. This is a rockin' deal we do. Last several months, several years, has been almost 300 people at that presentation. Scott Hanselman, sort of boss, kind of a dotted line thing.
Close
right?
enough.
Qdoba for food, really good swag. It's a very fun time. And of course, Thirsty Lion afterwards. Speaking of Thirsty Lion, we have gift cards from Thirsty Lion, right, James? We got, yes, okay. We have 3 gift cards from Thirsty Lion and from Nona Milius to give away tonight. And I think we have that movie tickets, Taylor, or whatever you want. Movie?
Correct.
Excellent, thank you.
And tumblers of fun.
What?
Tumblers.
Tumblers of fun, yes. That is excellent. I think I've been referred to as a tumbler of fun before. It's not really inappropriate. It was just some big guy up here, okay? Wasn't. Okay.
It's a friendly event.
Hey, Wade.
I'm right here.
Hey, what? You were over there.
I was over here, but then I can stay over there. So
Okay. Hey, Wade, Catapult's a sponsor of our group.
Thanks. Hey, I'm Wade at Catapult Recruiting. This is Amanda. She's one of our recruiters. She's been here a couple months now. She's killing it. She's doing an awesome job. We've met a lot of you guys in the past. Meeting some new people here every time, so we appreciate your support. We're a small company, but we're a good company. We do a lot of good things in the community, not just finding people good jobs, but good companies. So we appreciate that. Right now, I have a lot of needs for .NET people, so web development, anything that you guys are interested in, we probably have something that can fill that spot. A lot of people are hiring right away right now, so get our card. We're up there, and then we're gonna try to stay for the after party tonight and meet you over there too. So that's what we do.
Excellent, thank you. Tech Systems, Danielle. Welcome back, Danielle.
Hi.
We missed you.
I'm sorry I've been absent the last few months, but we're still here. We're still hiring, largest staffing and services in the country. We have tons of database openings right now, a few .NET, one in Hillsborough with one of our banking clients, one out in Gresham. Nike's our largest client. We have over 300 consultants out there, so while they're mainly Java, they definitely have several pieces that they're bringing in, more Azure and .NET Core and all that cool stuff. Angular Rec open right now with Nike, so love to meet you. I'll be at the little after hours thing as well, so come and grab me, grab my card, shoot me an email, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Vanderhouen, Taylor.
Hey everyone, my name is Taylor. I work for Vanderhouen. We're probably, as far as size goes, somewhere between the two companies that we just spoke about. We're 31 years old. We've been in Portland, located in Southwest Portland ever since. We work with a ton of companies in the area on their contract and direct hire staffing needs. We see a lot of .NET developer positions. We've probably worked with many of you here, but we'd love to meet you all. I will be at the afterwards. I'd love to meet you. Buy you a drink. Come talk to me.
I'll come talk to you. You want to talk right now?
I don't want to be lonely, so I can throw that out there.
You know I do the same. IT Motives. Angelo?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Angelo Seminary from IT Motives, and it's always great to come to such a great community event where you know so many people, friendly faces like you, Scott. And Rich, what you do is an inspiration, you and James both. Thank you, and keep it going. I should say that we have Gina Summers in the house tonight. No Alina. So Alina says hello. She's on vacation this week. So
Who let that happen?
You signed that. We are like everybody else. We are looking for a load of technical professionals. It seems like every week, every month, it just keeps ratcheting up. But I'll tell you what, if you're at all interested, come to the after hours, introduce yourself to Gina, come up and see me, and we'd love to meet you and talk with you. Thanks again, Rich.
And if you'd like to learn how to write code so that you can fill those kind of things, then say it. Home Depot? Anyone here from Home Depot tonight? No? Yes, for the newer people? You want to speak to it?
I can speak for him because I.
Well, and you're up too, so go ahead.
Well,
Go for it.
as far as Home Depot goes, I know Jonathan, their lead recruiter, and he did say to mention that they're constantly hiring out there, and they're really picky about who they like. It's good. They have a good work environment.
And they're closer now.
They are. They have that new building.
Yes.
Right up,
Just off the Columbia River.
Yep, exactly.
No longer out in, starts with a B. Yeah, way out there. Battleground.
That one.
You're going to say something else.
No, and I know that they're working late because they're constantly looking for some solid people, so do give them a call.
You can help them get off at a decent hour if you go there.
Give them less work to do. And my name's Steven. I'm from Robert Half Technology. Robert Half is the oldest and largest specialized staffing firm in the world. We are a global force at this point, and we're always looking for great local talent in Portland. Developers, QA people, either open source, .NET, anything. Come give us a jingle, say hi, see what we can do, and a conversation now is a good job tomorrow. So we'd love to meet all of you, and we'll be at the Thurston line afterwards.
Excellent.
Say hi.
Lacey?
Excuse me, and Lacey's with me. One of our recruiters here. She's killing it, and come meet her too. Grab her card.
I remember Lacey.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And since Nick couldn't make it tonight, I'll put a plug in for SoftSource. Hey, we're hiring. SoftSource Consulting is hiring. I love the place. I dreamed of working for SoftSource for a long time, and now I do. So if you'd like to come join us, let me know. We need people who are both really good developers and good people. So, because we have a very active, involved with client job at SoftSource. And I still got hired. I don't know. Okay, we'll try to run through as quickly as we can. Upcoming events. Oregon Sequel is in, what's that, tomorrow? Dang, tomorrow, huh? Tomorrow's Oregon Sequel and Hardware Hackers. If you recall last month, we had Mr. Brian Kostinich here, and he is running the Hardware Hackers group. PADNUG has the West Side Geek Dinner coming a week from today. The day after that is F Sharp. Anybody doing F Sharp group yet? Very good for your brain to go do the F Sharp thing because it will twist you in a really good way. You know this, yes? Yeah. Once you start doing that, I mean, C# actually has a lot of conventions that came right from F#, the little bullet, the arrow bullet thing and all, the anonymous functions and stuff. Well, this is where it all starts, is over on the F# group. Then we have PADNUG meets in 2 weeks for Ask the Experts, and Brian will be back to do some more hardware hacking with the Netduinos. I don't know if anyone saw his announcement, but Netduinos are now $40 for Wi-Fi and $35 for wired. That's getting cheaper. And he's got...
My prices, man.
Hmm?
It's almost Raspberry prices. That's pretty good.
That's cheaper than Raspberry.
Are they now?
In bulk, it's even cheaper, right?
Yeah.
And he's got stuff that's going to make it even less. Portland SQL Server User Group meets on the 23rd. Microsoft, the Azure, however you prefer, Demystify. That one actually usually meets at SoftSource, and that'd be August 27th. Then once again, the fourth Tuesday, PADNUG gets together on the east side. By the way, we had 20 people at Grand Central Bowling this last month. That east side doesn't ever get that big. That was huge. And Gina, you had some fun, didn't you?
That was great, yeah.
My wife even came. That's how awesome it was.
How many 300 games did you guys bowl?
We didn't get to the bowling part. We keep thinking it's going to happen, and sure enough, okay, I have to share. Fella you were there, right? Fella had actually searched Meetup for bowling things and came to our meetup. I'm sure he was sorely disappointed.
That's hilarious.
Fortunately, he'd already bowled, had a blister on his finger, so he didn't feel too bad about hanging out with us. He wasn't really up for any more bowling at that point.
That's hilarious.
Soon, James. You hear all the recruiters. We need more. So he actually works at the Hillsborough Airport. We're going to try to get him into development too. Then let's see, August 28th. TypeScript. Hey.
We haven't announced a speaker yet. Just stay tuned to meet up.
Stay tuned to meet up. Got it. And just in case, let me skip ahead. Oh, I don't even have to skip ahead much. PADNUG, September 4th next month is Jason Grigsby's back. If everyone's seen Jason Grigsby, he's just another one of the awesome, great, wonderful presenters we've had over the years. He used to run the Mobile Portland, which was a lot more iPhone and Android, of course, but he is a wonderful presenter. He's going to be doing progressive web apps again. He did that for us a little over a year ago, and he's updated the presentation a little bit. And by the way, there's probably a lot of new faces in the audience, so I'm sure we're all going to have a good time with that. Wyoming Valley Software Engineers are meeting September 6th.
So if you happen to have missed Kalo at either a machine learning meetup or the machine learning conference where he presented, here's your opportunity.
Very
He's
cool.
an amazing presenter, but you have the wrong link.
I do?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. I think it's actually just a matter of editing. I think the number's right, the address is incorrect. Yeah. Well, just go to Meetup. You can find it. I think that's what I missed. Then Geek Dinner in September. But I'll also mention October, Mr. Churchill will be back with us in October to present TypeScript for the C# developer or something to that effect. Is that fair?
Yes.
Excellent. That I really want to see.
Just what you said.
Yeah, okay.
If you have not heard James present on something ever, you owe it to yourself to come to that night because James is one of the best presenters anywhere on any subject matter. So
Just like the, just like.
I'll catch up with you later.
Okay, who thinks they are, well, you all are going to the after party, right? Come on. Why would you not? Taylor's buying everyone a drink in the room. How can you not go? By the way, Ramona will be over talking to you too tonight. Just saying. All right. Alrighty, with further ado, anyone else have an announcement? Slalom, you're new. You want to put a plug in? Because I usually give a freebie.
Sure. I work for Slalom Consulting. We're one of the very few no-travel consulting firms here in Portland. Work with a variety of different industries, and we have a practice called technology enablement and information management analytics, which is where our tech space is. So we are always looking to hire. We're looking for a few technology leaders in particular, so you'd be comfortable with business development on top of that, but I'm always looking for just really solid tech people to join our team.
Will you be able to join us afterward?
I'm going to try to.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a great place, and it's on the way home. You know? And your name was Tor?
Oh, sorry. My name is Tori Opsahl.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. If somehow you don't know the way to Thirsty Lion, Cornell Road, turn at the Macy's. And that's about it. Hey, would you like to present?
Sure, why not?
Awesome.
But wait, we leave that to the end. That's
What?
true. No,
What?
I thought we were giving away gifts.
Oh,
No, I was
swag
like,
at
I'm
the end.
messing this up.
People
now.
got to stay for the swag. They got to listen to you first, then they
That's
get the swag.
hilarious. Awesome. Thank you.
You don't give the freebies away until the end.
Don't give away the goodies.
Pay for it by listening. Of course, people probably leave after hearing you.
I know, man. I want to bore them to death. All right.
It's going up there. It's not down. Oh, there it is.
Good to go.
Life's good.
Good evening. Woo. So first off, I have to say thank you to Rich and really just the whole team that puts together PADNUG. It's always an honor and a privilege to get a chance to speak. So thank you guys for having me. And yeah, you know, as Rich mentioned, a lot has changed. As you can see, I'm now Team DC. Right? I've always been a huge Batman fan, but no, and in all seriousness, like, yeah, I've recently joined Microsoft. So Team Microsoft, go Microsoft. And it's an honor, right? It's an honor to, you know, always have used Microsoft tools and now get to kind of represent the company. So hopefully I do my my team proud and talk a little bit about .NET in the startup space. So how many folks in here heard my last talk or my first talk? Just show of hands. Okay, cool. So we got some newcomers. Awesome. Okay, great. Okay, well, that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So I like to start with this quote by Maya Angelou, and I think it's a really good quote for two reasons. One, I think it really kind of describes software really well, and then I also think it really kind of describes startups really well. And the reason I say that is because, you know, the quote says, "Do the best you can until you know better, then when you know better, do better." Now, this is very interesting because, as we all know, the .NET world has changed quite a bit, right? We went from a, you know, pretty closed source, you know, Microsoft to one who's now running on every single platform. And what I find kind of interesting about that is, you know, before, you know, we were kind of forced into a, not a box, but, you know, if you were doing Microsoft, you ran on Windows, and that was just the way the world was. But since then, the world has changed, right? There's Angular, there's, you know, TypeScript, there's, you know, how many other JavaScript frameworks and just so many different technologies that it can actually get kind of confusing. So one of the things that I think is kind of interesting about that when it comes to startups is that a lot of times it's not an exact science, right? There's, you know, a lot of philosophy, there's a lot of thoughts about how startups should be run, that kind of thing. But the thing I try to live by, and the thing that, you know, I coach folks on, people who are either in startups themselves, is to do the best you know until you know better. And I know firsthand it's because I've had a lot of failures along the way. So that being said, you know, I like to use this because, you know, I think today I'm going to show you a lot of code. It's probably not going to be that great. There's going to be some bugs. You guys will probably find some things, but just know that, yeah, a lot of startups are kind of going through that. And you know, I think that the best startups, you know, follow this philosophy. So quick overview. I'll talk a little bit about myself. I know some of y'all were able to attend the last session, but I don't think I talked about this next project that is probably one of my most successful failures, if that makes any sense. And then I'll talk a little bit about just what I consider the formula, right? The startup formula, just, you know, having seen startups with exits and also grow their users to about 80,000, and just some of the things that I think work really well. And then take a look at some of this with regards to some of the tools and some of the apps and some of the things I'm doing currently, and also using and working with .NET. And then talk a little bit about the future, right? So what other things am I going to build, and what are some of the things that, you know, for anyone who's interested in either entrepreneurship or just getting into startups, I recommend you take a look at, as well as some of the tools of the startup trade. So just quick check. Everybody can hear me pretty good, right? Good? All right, perfect. So that being said, I'll segue into, you know, the beginning, what I call the beginning. Way back in 2011, as a fresh-faced young chap coming out of, you know, my master's, where I did my degree in computer science, I joined Intel. And, you know, I joined Intel in Intel Software Quality Group, which is pretty awesome, right? Because, you know, when you're new and you're fresh, you're supposed to learn all these cool and new things. But what I learned when I first got to Intel was that college actually didn't prepare me to be a software engineer. Go figure, right? You know, as a matter of fact, you know, in school you learn C++, you learn Java, you do a couple side projects, and you do a couple things to kind of get you there. But completely different than when you jump into the software quality organization and you're doing enterprise application design. So, you know, one of the first things I had to do was pick my poison. And what I mean by that is, you know, at the time, nobody told me that, hey, you should do this in .NET or you should do this in C#. So I played around a bit. You know, I did a little bit of stuff in Java. I did a little bit of stuff in, what was the other language at the time? Python. And I realized that ultimately what I would settle on, and, you know, you'll see in the next screen, was .NET for a couple of reasons. Now, this is really important because for me, it really kind of would shape the next couple of years for me and the way I kind of approach the concept of building a startup. Also in 2011, this was the first time I actually attended Startup Weekend, which for anybody who hasn't attended, I think is a really great way to really build an idea that you either have or work together with a team and validate in just one weekend. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So this is the first tool that I built at Intel when I joined. And as you can see, it has a couple different pieces on there. And it's really important, I think, because when you look at a lot of startups, and really if you look at, when you look at a lot of companies, they all kind of do pretty much the same thing. There's usually some kind of a tool, whether it's an app. In this case, this is a WPF app. And that tool is going to talk to a database, right? And then ultimately, that tool is going to return to a web UI or maybe perhaps there's a bit of analytics or some reporting that somebody ultimately wants and needs. And what I found at the time when I did this project was that .NET met all of those criteria. So by learning C# and learning one language, I'd be able to build tools using XAML and WPF. I'd be able to use ASPX and design a web application, and then all of this would work great together with, Entity Framework and all of the tools that came in the .NET stack. So for me, this was great because, once I saw this and I worked with it, I was sold. I mean, there was .NET and that was it. And this is back in 2011. Now, I preface that because one of the things I think is important is, around 2008, there's this company. They released this new device. Anybody know what that device was? iPhone, yes. And that was very interesting, right? Because when the iPhone was released in 2008, they also released the App Store. And one of the things that really changed was that no longer could I stay in my safe cocoon of .NET. As a matter of fact, I think most of the software that's produced these days is actually either in support of an app or some kind of a mobile application. So, one of the things that, I had to learn along the way was really how to do mobile app development. And, for me, being a PC guy my entire life, it was kind of a tough adjustment. As a matter of fact, I didn't get my first Mac until about a year and a half ago, let alone my first iPhone. So imagine that, being in software, saying that you want to build apps, you want to solve problems for people in the world, but literally losing half or more of the market. So one of the things that I did was, while I was, at Intel, I got a chance to move down to the Bay. And I was in a rotational program that allowed me to move to Silicon Valley. And it was really cool because one of the things that I realized there is that, as I was kind of building, there was something happening. Specifically, I picked Silverlight to do a project on, and everybody knows how that ended up. There was this movement going on in which people were really kind of, pushing for HTML5 and, just JavaScript and all these things. And I couldn't get with it. So, I stuck with my Silverlight and I said, this is, Microsoft is right and they know what they're doing and this is the future, right? Or so I thought. And that was great because, once again, this is one of the times that I had my first, rounds of failures. I actually had formed a company with some of my friends from college, and they, they were Python developers and, Java developers, and nobody could understand why I thought everything had to be built with, .NET or, in .NET. And, what ultimately ended up was our first project. We started down the path of building it. I'm being kind of stubborn. I'm saying, well, I'm going to use Silverlight. And they're like, we're going to go with this. We ended up having 2 different applications. Guess how that played out and who won out there. Ultimately, Microsoft would go on to no longer support. Well, they're still technically support, but ultimately the fight was won by HTML5 and the open web. I think Chrome has dropped support for Flash for the most part, or there's like a hack you have to do these days to get it to work. But, this was all in the effort to have a more open web. So, for me, that was good because it was one of those times that I kind of learned that you can't be absolutely dogmatic about a language or technology. As a matter of fact, as software developers and engineers, it's really important for us to be flexible, right? Because this is a forever changing field. So for me, that was a good experience and a good lesson that I learned early on. Beyond Vital would later go on to kind of, shut down. But that was good too, because it was my first experience having co-founder issues and realizing that, those can make or break a company. So that's one of the lessons that I learned, and one of the things that I think is really important when we talk about startups and just technology and building together in general. So one of the things I didn't get a chance to talk about during my last talk was part pick. So part pick was while I was in my transition from Silicon Valley back to Portland, one of the projects that I worked on. And actually, I don't think I was supposed to show you guys this one, but here, let's go ahead and switch to the video.
Placement parts. Our mission is to seamlessly facilitate the search and purchase of parts using computer vision technology.
Oh, no sound. 1 second. Okay, no audio.
Part pick. Part pick
Good idea.
is visual search for replacement parts. Our mission is to seamlessly facilitate the search and purchase of parts using computer vision technology. If you needed to find this part, how would you describe it? You might say it's black, it's rubber, it's kind of squiggly. The words that come to mind won't do the trick. In fact, if you search for those words, Google will return 2.7 million results. Reality is, text-based part search sucks, which is why most people call into a distributor or hop in their car and head to the nearest hardware store for help. While I was working as a sales supervisor at McMaster Car, one of the top parts distributors in the country, I heard people ranging from do-it-yourselfers to seasoned repairmen struggle to describe the parts they needed to buy from us. More than 40% of callers did not have a part name or number to search with. So, armed with this 15-pound McMaster Car catalog and their potentially limited knowledge of a given part, our sales reps set out to help our customers. This could mean long, frustrating phone calls, which often led to incorrectly ordered parts. An incorrect part delivered meant the customer's project was on hold for at least another day. Productivity stopped. Then they called us again, and they yelled. Then we had to go through this.
Okay, we'll stop there. So this was one of the first startups that I got involved with and had a bit of success. So this was actually TechCrunch Disrupt 2014. So for those who don't know, who aren't as involved with the startup world, this is kind of like the startup Super Bowl. And we ended up being in the top 3 spot for the championship. Now, what ended up happening was we actually lost to a company called Alfred, and they do something very similar to TaxRapid, but I think it was rigged. But one of the things that's kind of interesting about that was, this was a great problem at a great time at a great point in my career. And one of the things that I remember about this is, although we didn't win.
In 2014. Let's give it up for these guys. We had a great time. You're probably wondering, why is Accenture here at this event? We're not trying to sell our strategy and consulting to startups. Although if somebody's interested, please let us know and we'll talk to you guys. No, a lot of you know who Accenture is, but you may not know what we actually do. We serve the Global 2000. We are serving the 19 industries around the world to take our clients to the next level. And in every industry, whether it's healthcare or oil and gas, banking, retail, consumer product goods, across the board, the leaders in these industries want to have that competing edge to give them the differentiation to compete against everybody else in that industry. And more, it's apparent to us and it's apparent to our clients that we've got to look at companies like you've just sat through for the last couple of days. These are the companies that are going to help push things forward in all of those 19 industries. And that's why we're here today. So for our clients, we're looking at which of these companies, we're scouting around to see which one of these makes sense. For the startups, we hope to be the partner of choice and the channel to get to the global 2000.
I'm going to forward
right?
a little
to be able
bit.
to set up the leader of these are non-innovations.
Gosh, I should have forwarded way more than that. He talks a lot. Yeah. Long story short.
Guys, and it really, I mean, we were fighting tooth and nail up until the lunchtime today, trying to figure out which way we're going to go. But props to Self-Lender. They're doing good stuff. They're helping folks that are having a hard time getting into a credit score, and we can easily see how we can partner with them on great stuff together. Technical problem, they're going right after it. We like the fact that there's a lot of moving parts in that startups kind of deployment of the technology to their clients. We can easily see clients that we want to actually bring them to and figure out how we're going to make this a reality at scale. So we like a lot of that. We love it when we know that we can add value to the startup. If we're not adding value, it's not really something that's interesting for us. So, without further ado, the winner of 2014 TechCrunch Disrupt Enterprise Disruptor category from Accenture Open Innovation is ParkPick. Disrupt.
Now, this is a great moment because, once again, this was a project that I kind of picked up on the side. I thought would be cool. Sorry about the quality of this, by the way. And, you know, had a lot of ups and downs. You know, one of the things that that's kind of interesting about this is that for anybody that's in this space and knows this space, this is a really hard problem. Computer vision in general is a really hard problem. And at the time we were working on it, you know, the approaches that, you know, we have access to today, some of the APIs we have access to today aren't really available. So there was a technique that was coming out around the time that we were working on this project known as convolutional neural networks, which a lot of folks know today as, what is that term that they use? That's the technical term, but pretty much a lot of the new SDKs that are, you know, using, it's deep learning. Is what people are calling it these days. But, you know, this problem was being solved back in 2014 with a very shoestring budget and by a girl named Jewel Burks, who was at you know, Google for a while before she left to go to McMaster-Carr to be closer to the family and realized this problem. Now, as I mentioned, this is a problem that's tough to solve, and, you know, Jewel's not very technical, right? So, you know, one of the things that was really great about being involved in the startup community was that, you know, a lot of folks knew about me and knew my name, and, you know, they passed my contact information over. Now, this is good because, once again, you know, I'm always itching to learn something new, and now I have to shed that failure of the silver light that we will not talk about. And, you know, this project was awesome. It was fun, and I started working with Jewel, and I started working with the team. And one of the things that, you know, I felt is that I was really dedicated to this idea, so much so that, you know, I was spending ridiculous amounts of hours and time working on this project. Now, one of the things that is important in any startup situation, I think, is to really just have clarity, right? Clarity in terms of what contributions you bring to the table, what contributions do the business folks bring to the table. And in this case, I was so just excited about the idea that I didn't really, you know, think about all of that. And, you know, one of the things that was really interesting about this picture and this app, this is actually one of the apps that I built. This is the app that was shown at TechCrunch, is that this app was built in about 30 days, right? Because 30 days prior to that, you know, I was talking to Jewel and I was like, yeah, I'm not really getting paid, and this isn't, you know, this isn't really what I, you know, this is not really what I signed up in. You know, I was getting ready to shoot that email off, and not too long before that, I got an email from her saying that, hey, we're going to TechCrunch Disrupt. So, you know, what's interesting about that is this app did not exist before that time. And keep in mind, I'm anti-Mac. So what you're actually seeing in front of you is an app that was built using Cordova at the time, and, you know, a cross-platform app. There was the Intel XDK, RIP. which was also another one of these kind of proprietary tools, right? That, you could string together apps with. And, if I didn't learn my lesson from Silverlight, then I definitely learned it the next time when the XDK was end of life. But this was a really great opportunity for two reasons. One is that, I got to see the results of, some of my hard work. I had some conversations around equity and what it means and what contributions do I bring. But one of the things that didn't result in this was anything that would be profitable to me. And after TechCrunch Disrupt, we kind of went our separate ways. But one of the things that's really cool to announce is that, since then, PartPick was acquired by Amazon. And most recently, they've integrated this technology into their most recent part finder. So Jewel was an acqui-hire from her startup, and now she works with Amazon and has integrated this technology. But that was a great experience for a couple of reasons. One, this is at a time when, I'm kind of learning about different technologies. I'm learning about different tools and techniques. And, I ultimately come to the conclusion that, there's more to the world, right? And then there's also more to the startup game as well. And that kind of lit a fire under me that has, not died since. So, almost since 2014, at some point in time, I've always been involved, whether it's advising startups or consulting or even just building my own apps. And that's what the remainder of our talk is going to be about. So that being said, here's what I think the formula is, right? So having this experience, having, failed and having seen startups that are doing extremely well, I think that, if you want to build a successful app, right, you got to start with a big problem. So, when we take a look at PartPick, the problem is one that I'm not sure if anybody in this room has had. Has anybody ever been in a situation where they were trying to fix something, they don't even know what to start? Oh, we got a couple hands, great. So this is a problem that's shared by quite a few folks. And, this is one of the takeaways that I took from PartPick is, start with a big problem, right? Then target a huge market ready to adopt it. Like I said, there's a couple folks in here who raised their hand. And, the thing about building apps is that, you can definitely build them, just for fun, just for yourself. But it's a lot more gratifying personally, right, when your apps get many downloads and, it's actually reaching the target use case. So a lot of the apps that I'll talk about today will kind of like highlight what the problem is and what does that market look like. And then, ideate until you arrive at a novel solution. So this one's kind of interesting because I'm sure that Jewel was not the first person to think up this idea, but it was also kind of having the perspective. One of the things that she told me, and one of the things that's true about a lot of industries, is this: they just don't know. I mean, if you've been working at McMaster-Carr for 20 years and you've always had that big yellow book, right? You're probably really good at paging through and figuring out what's what, but having the outside perspective, right? Her coming from Google and then going to work McMaster-Carr, she said there has to be a better way. So I think that that's one of the things that's really important when you're kind of thinking about a startup or an idea that you want to ultimately implement. There's flip side to this, right? If you think about it, something like Instagram isn't really that innovative, right? It's you take some pictures and you post them, but there's a spin to it, something that people didn't see, right? There's a saying that genius hits the mark that no one else can see, and I think that that's often the case when you look at a lot of successful startups. And then to that note, build a great product that users love. So I give the example of PartPick, but PartPick is still relatively new. They just got integrated into Amazon. Who knows where that's going to go? But when I think about one of the products that took a lot of the startup world by storm, I would have to say that's Slack. Quick show of hands, how many Slack users in here? Okay, exactly. So Slack was, once again, it's the Instagram, right? It's the one where it's like we've always had chat, we've always had IRC, we've always had these kind of things, but they did it just a little bit different, and different enough such that we all are users of the product. So I think that that's one of the criteria for building a great startup, a great app. The next part of that is to prove they love it with data. So this one is really interesting because this is what a lot of startups, I think, kind of struggle with. Another term for this is product market fit, or lack thereof, right? So there's a lot of apps. There's a lot of startups, even companies today that, have a great market cap that still quite haven't figured this out, right? In terms of, well, if my app didn't exist tomorrow, would it matter? And I think the only way you can really do that successfully is through data. And, one of the things that's really important, I think, when you're building a startup or you're making an app in particular, right, is to be able to prove it, right? Whether it's, through some quantitative or qualitative aspects of your app or your idea's usage. I think that that's a really big one. The next part, and this one is actually probably more important than I would say building the app itself, is to really have a great strategy for growth. So, and I'm terribly guilty of this. I think a lot of engineers are really gung-ho about the building part. I think, Part Pick was a great example about that, right? Is, we're going to build it and we're going to be millionaires. We're going to be awesome, right? Whereas before you become a millionaire, somebody actually needs to want to and use whatever it is that you built, right? And there's actually a lot of work that goes into that. One of the things that comes to mind is one of my favorite books called Traction. And it kind of talks about this concept of how, your startup, your product, whatever it is that you're building should be 50%, traction and then 50% product development, meaning that, when you're building it, simultaneously you should be collecting emails, simultaneously you should be running some campaigns, doing some things that will allow you to, day one your app is ready, launch it and be successful. On that note, you have to make money. So this is one of the things that's really interesting about a lot of the companies in Silicon Valley right now is that they're not very profitable. And, one of the things that, is kind of interesting there is they tend to monetize on marketing or selling data. But, I think that the best startups that I see, the best startups that, I think tend to survive over the long run are companies like Slack, where the product is just so good that you eventually are like, I'm just going to pay these folks. Finally, continue to build an amazing team. Now, this one was very interesting just because this probably has been that's probably the most important one. One of the things that I've learned personally in building apps, building startups, building companies is how important team is. How important it is to understand kind of like where your gaps are, where are some things that you can do better, and then who and where to find those folks who can help you, whether it's people to do your marketing or to help you with your sales. So, this is one of those things where there's this concept of you should always be selling, right? Everybody's in sales. And I think as a founder or as a technical CTO or CEO, building an amazing team is very important just because you can't do it all. You don't want to do it all, and you're not good at doing it all. So, that being said, it's really important to find that great team. So that being said, talk a little bit about some of the apps that I've built. This is the wrong slide, but let me go ahead and hop into this. So for those who weren't around during the last talk that I gave, I'll just do a quick run through for some of this. So this is actually one of the apps that is currently live and it's available, and it's called CutUp. It's a platform that connects people through here. So specifically, there's a kind of like a target demographic. Essentially for a lot of folks, especially in the minority community, barbershops and hair salons continue to function at an archaic level. And, there's a lot of kind of folks in the hair space, but, they don't really have a product market fit for the minority consumer, specifically just because my hair is, well, a little bit different than yours. And, one of the opportunities that me and my co-founder identified is that there is an unmet need within the minority community for a app that makes it easy for us to actually find barbers or stylists who can provide hair care services. And the idea is that with a service like this, there's a lot of customers who'd be willing to pay a premium to have the salon or the shop come to them. So the mission and the idea of CutUp is to simplify the process of finding a new barber or hairstylist for people of color. Now, I think when I originally gave this talk, this was about 2 years ago, I talked a little bit about building CutUp Web. And I talked a little bit about, the idea or the decision one of the other lessons I learned, to switch from making it a fully MVC app to one that leveraged web API. And I made this decision once again when I kind of took a look and I saw that, hey, this iOS thing, this Android thing, this is here to stay. And people aren't really using the web like they used to. So if you remember, I think where I left off was, I had a couple mock-ups and a couple designs ready to go to actually implement into our mobile app. Now, one of the things that's not readily apparent from this is the amount of work, time, and effort that went into kind of building something like this. So CutUp, I think, has been something I've been working on since 2014. And we really got the mobile app on the store just about a little over a year and a half ago. And, there's all sorts of reasons for that. But probably the biggest one is just that, one of the key lessons that I've learned when it comes to startups and just, like ideas in general, is that it's a marathon, not a sprint. Specifically, good companies, good ideas, they take a while to build and they take a while to get off the ground. And, I don't know if anybody knows, but do folks know that Slack was actually an accident? Yeah, who knows what they were trying to build? Any clues? So Slack actually started off as a game company. They were trying to build a game. I think it was an MMPG or massively multiplayer game. And, the game failed horribly. It was really, really bad. But in the process, what they realized is that they had built a really great chat app. And, the rest, as they say, was history from there. So, one of the things that, is maybe not going to be apparent when I show some of the stuff that I'm going to show now is just, once again, is that we've had those moments, right? We've gone down the wrong path. As a matter of fact, I think when we started building this, it was actually in Cordova before we, once again, made the move to the fully .NET version or the native iOS version. So that being said, this is CutUp. This is the idea of CutUp. And one of the things that I like to talk about with CutUp is really kind of this idea of I'm not going to say it, okay, I'm going to call it an idea architecture. And, one of the things that's really interesting with CutUp is that if you remember, or for folks who don't remember, usually when I approach problems now or startup type ideas, I start off with first of all, figuring out, well, does this have a good market? Is it something that I think that will help to address that issue? And then once we kind of do that due diligence, we kind of hop into the design phase. And I call this kind of like an idea architecture because what's not apparent on this is the other half, which is the non-technical part, or the part where we're not even doing any coding, right? That actually makes up a big part of, I think, the app success. And, for me, that's the wireframes or the mock-up. So I like to say wireframes just because I'm terrible at design. You do not want me to design anything. I cannot design my way out of a box. And typically what I generate are wireframes. As a matter of fact, I'm going to see if I have any of my, okay, yeah, no. So what I tend to do is I will, I'll screenshot pictures from other apps that I like, and then I use that by, putting them together. And, starting at an idea or building an app, it could be as simple as that. But typically what ends up happening is once you have that kind of wireframe, those mock-ups in place, you can then move into something that's a little bit more high fidelity. So this is usually where you'll pull in a designer or somebody who is really good at UI UX. So I say all that to say that one of the things that I do, and one of the things that I think is really helpful in being successful before even writing a line of code, is to design what I'm calling a work package. So this is the work package for CutUp. And this is after the first set of wireframes have been generated and designed. And what's really nice about this is that once you kind of have this work package in place, it becomes a kind of thing where you could potentially hand off to a developer, whether you're doing the development, whether you're outsourcing the development, or even just for you to remember, well, why was that button there again, and what is this supposed to do? So the idea behind this kind of like this work package, this application kind of idea architecture, is that to make it we want to really make it very simple, right, for us to implement the design to spec. So these are some of the ones for CutUp, you know, basic stuff like enter your credentials here. But one of the things that I think is really cool is, you know, we don't like to leave things to chance, right? So perfect example here. This should do, as my partner, his name is Eric, says, it should do a smooth toggle, right? So it's not just, it doesn't just, you know, jump to the other side. It should actually kind of slide over. And what's really cool about doing something like this is that you actually take a lot of time to think through the user experience, right? Think through what it is that your customer or your users actually want to see. These are some of the things that, you know, once again, I advocate for having co-founders with, or people who are, you know, really good at this kind of thing with, because, you know, I gloss over that kind of stuff, but it really makes a difference when it comes to building out the app. And, you know, I'm not going to go too much in depth with this, because instead what we'll jump into is, you know, some of the code and what I really like about this. Now, I think I'm going to take a chance and we'll actually do some of this live, because the Wi-Fi is behaving, and actually do a demo for what the flow for CutUp is before we take a look at some of the code. So let's actually get this going. So CutUp is what I would consider a two-sided app, and we've all used them before. If you've used Lyft or if you've used Uber, then you've used a two-sided app. And what that really just means is that it's an app in which there's customers, and then there's potential riders or people to serve them. And in this case, CutUp has two types of customers. There's the barber and stylist, and then there's the actual customer who wants to get their hair cut. So here I am on the left, or my right, your left. And here is a stylist in this particular case. And one of the things that's really cool about this is, you know, I didn't really talk about this, but kind of differentiating ourselves a bit from some of our competitors. And, you know, what's really cool about this is, you know, with this app, you can actually, you know, kind of zoom in and you can see who is around you, if there's a barber or stylist, and you can actually, you know, go ahead and peek and see what kind of services they offer, right? And you can actually book them through the app like this. But one of the things that we thought would be important, one of the novel aspects of this particular solution, and one of the things that is really cool and I think very .NET-y, right, is leveraging SignalR to actually do something a little bit different. So if I'm a stylist or a barber, I can actually do what I call go live, right? And the idea behind this is that, you know, if barber and stylists are at the shop and they're just hanging out and they're, you know, don't have any customers, they can put themselves on this platform and be live. Now, if I'm a customer and, you know, let's say I've never been to Portland, Oregon, but, you know, I touch down and I need a haircut or something, right? Ideally, what you'd be able to do with the app is you'd actually be able to go to, you know, your Instabook, right? You could say I'm looking for a barber or stylist, right? In this case, I'll go with stylist because that's what we're logged in as on this phone. And you could say something like, I just need a quick cut, right? Now, what's awesome about this is in addition to that, you can actually add a picture. And then you could send that picture to the barber or stylist within the platform. The idea being that rather than for you to call around and trying to find a barber or stylist, essentially, you know, any barber or stylist who's active or live gets the request. And then from there, the barber or stylist can view the request. And one of the things that we thought about for this particular user, or in this case, is, well, we've all been there. I'm just down the road, just 5 minutes away. So with this app, you can actually see if the customer is close by, right? And you can then make a decision as a barber or stylist if you're actually going to take that customer. And then one of the things that we've added is the ability to kind of name your own price. So in this case, I'll go with $1. I'll send the offer. And then instantly, because of SignalR, right, we're able to see that Instabook request, and the customer can once again take a look at the profile, take a look to see if the barber or stylist is, you know, within their range. As you can see, we got some UI things to fix, but you know, I'll take the $1 price point that she's offering. And in this case, we can actually complete the transaction all through the app. So we can go ahead and complete the Instabook. And then I think there's a bug as well here, but Yeah, no card apparently. But the idea is that all from within the app and all from within the platform, we can do our booking, our scheduling, and then, you know, any barber or stylist would be able to kind of complete the transaction on their end and do all of this from the phone. Now, what's really awesome about this is that all of this has been, like I said, kind of prototyped out here, right? In our what we call I call it a work package, right? The idea being that I'm not that great at iOS development, but you know, somebody who's better than me, right, should be able to use this and should be able to call this, right? Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting is that if we once again kind of go back to the architecture detail is you can actually start to see some of the places where you know, you start to see the seams, right? So here, for example, like I said, a while back, we made the decision to go from, you know, a monolithic MVC app to one that allowed us to now use a RESTful API-based architecture. We see that, you know, there's a whole nother app for the Android and there's a whole nother app for the iOS. And then, you know, some of the apps that I'll show today are also built using Xamarin and C#. And what that really does is it kind of frees us up. It allows us to obviously work with a client-server architecture. And now, you know, our clients don't really care as long as our server and our API all agree. Now, one of the things that has changed, and you know, this is maybe a couple years back, is that if you take a look at this, before, dependency injection was kind of an afterthought. And one of the really awesome things that .NET Core and Microsoft has done is made that a first-class citizen. So when we take a look at one of the other apps and how that architecture has changed, we'll see that some of these things go away. And in this particular diagram or this view, essentially each thing is either referenced or references something else. So a perfect example is that the Android iOS is dependent on the CutUp API, which is dependent on the CutUp API service, and then the ultimate services, which I would say is more like the business logic layer, data access layer, and then the domain. But when we actually take this and we use that as a basis, we actually see that one of the things that we've done, or what I've tried to do, is really kind of make it very straightforward to go from the code or from that high-level architecture to the code and understand what's going on. So in this particular example, we start with the core of our solution, which is going to contain our domain layer, our data access layer, and some of the other things that we already know are going to be used. And if you look at it, they're really kind of set up to be non-self-referencing, right? So, you know, the data, for example, can refer to the core, and then the core can refer to, well, that's just the core. But all of these are kind of like built in such a way that essentially they don't self-reference. And as you move up the tech stack, essentially you just kind of reverse or go backwards from your DLLs and from your library. So in this particular example, you know, once again, we've kind of talked a little bit about how, you know, you go from the concept, the idea, but when it actually comes to the code, what's really nice about this architecture is that it's really applicable and reusable in a lot of common scenarios, at least the ones that I deal with, right, when it comes to startup, right? So what was really cool about CutUp is that that app in itself really kind of served as a basis and a framework, right, for really enabling me to do a lot of really awesome things in different, you know, projects. And then also, as, you know, things kind of evolved with, you know, Xamarin and .NET, really kind of created a framework and such that, you know, I'll kind of do a quick demo here of how you can actually use one machine to do just about everything. So that being said, let's actually see if we can do some testing. Now, since this app is only on the iOS at the moment, I actually have it on here in Xcode. And one of the things that's really cool, one of the things that I'll talk about towards the end of my talk, is some of the nice tools and some of the things that kind of enable you to work better with, you know, .NET and also MVC or Web API while you're doing your development. In this particular case, for CutUp, one of the things that I have installed is an app called Conveyor. So I'm going to go ahead and compile this. And what's really nice about Conveyor is that it'll actually allow you to generate an IP address that can be referenced within your local network. So in this case, I'm connected to the hotspot on my phone. My phone is also, my Mac is also connected to this same hotspot. And when this code runs, what it'll actually do is it'll actually generate a unique IP address that I could then connect to. So most of us are used to it connecting to localhost, in this case 7431, but that doesn't really do us much good when we want to do a debug or test our endpoint or our API. So in this particular example, CutUp is up and running, right? And if we take a look back at .NET or in Visual Studio, we see that we have Conveyor, which is an extension running, and Conveyor has given us a remote IP address and a remote URL that we can now access either from a device or, in this particular case, from Xcode. So one of the things that I can do, and like I said, when you know better, do better. There's probably some CI/CD stuff that I should be doing here, but if we look for dev.cutup.io, this is actually going to be the constant or the base address for our URL and for our endpoints. And what we can actually do is just kind of change it so that it matches our IP or our remote address here. Oh no, that's not what we wanted. So I get funky. With that set, we can actually now use the simulator or connect the device. I'm going to go ahead with the simulator. And you know, the idea being if you have a developer or if you're the sole developer, you can actually, you know, do the client side and then test your RESTful API without ever having to go to the cloud or actually deploy your application. So once this loads, we can actually come back here. And place a couple breakpoints. So you can see the Mac is taking its time, but while we're here, let's talk a little bit about how this architecture allows us to make this app a little bit easier to kind of debug and test. So one of the things that, you know, I've learned over the years and I've gotten much better at is figuring out how to do application architecture such that it's testable and such that you can actually kind of break your application apart. And one of the things that I think is really important to that is leveraging things like AutoMapper, as well as also separating out your client-side models from your entities and from your database. So one of the things that you see here, for example, is that you know, when you're doing a lot of mobile apps, you have an API, and typically this API is going to be called by any number of clients. And what I like to do is actually standardize the response that my clients are going to get. So in this particular example for CutUp, you'll see that there's a API status message. This is going to be something that the client is able to use. And then a message that if, say, there's an error or something else that the client returns can be displayed. But in this particular case, once we log in, we probably really want back something that we can use within the app. So in this particular example, once the app is running, then if the app wants to run, I have two simulators. Okay, we'll come back. But yeah, as I mentioned, right, the app starts up and you'd ideally be able to hit the endpoint with, just the credentials or the information that you need. So in this example, if we take a look back at the login screen, very simple. We're just going to take the username and password. Our actual model, right, is kind of designed such that that endpoint only takes the information that it needs. It doesn't expose anything that's unneeded, right? And then in this particular case, we do that using the required tag. Now, in our client, right, whether it's Android or iOS, each client requests the endpoint or the API however they see fit. But ultimately, one of the things that's really nice with API and MVC was that, essentially as long as the model comes in the way we're expecting, we get our information, and then we can use the underlying user manager, and I think this was the, what is this called? The MVC identity manager to do our login. So if this works the way it's supposed to, once we're done, we're able to get our ID, we're able to get our token, and then we're able to actually step through the code and debug all from one system using Visual Studio and Xcode together. So as you can see, we send our request, grab our ID, and ultimately this just kind of follows the high-level architecture documented here. In this case, I came back, and if all goes well, we switch back to our Mac, and we're here. Probably hit another breakpoint. Okay, maybe not. But this is really cool for me for a couple of reasons. One, I, have done all my debug within the same set of tools, same set of machines. And, I could really iterate very fast on either APIs or ideas. And then on top of that, you have a lot of the great things that come with this, such as, being able to use Swagger or all the awesome things that come with .NET. So one of the arguments I make a lot of times when I'm talking to my friends and we're going back and forth is, they kind of talk a little bit about, development speed. And what I really like about this is that, within the same tools, within the same set of things, you have, everything that you essentially need, right, to kind of test out your first step of your API. So in this particular example, finally it loaded. We were able to kind of do this and then also get our other information loaded. And this is one example of one of the ways that, I've used .NET and CutUp has progressed, right, since the original talk I gave a couple years back using this set of tools. So on that note, let's take a look at yet another. Specifically, I wanted to take a look at Ribbon. So folks may remember Ribbon. Ribbon was the gift-giving app, and the idea behind Ribbon was to make it easier for you to give great gifts to your family and friends. Now, when I started with Ribbon, I actually had a co-founder, and he did a lot of the mobile development. He did the client-side stuff, and I was just not good at it. And somewhere along the way, Microsoft came along and with Xamarin made it a little bit easier for me to do. So what I've done with Ribbon since that time is actually rewritten it to also be a cross-platform solution using Xamarin. And one of the things that's interesting about that solution in particular is that one of the things I've struggled with when I'm doing development with either iOS or Android is making it such that it kind of conforms to some of the things I've gotten used to developing WPF. So we're talking about MVVM versus MVC, or some of the other ways that you may do development in, say, Java and some of the other languages such as Swift. So one of the things that's really cool about Ribbon is that, once again, we have the back end, which more or less follows the architecture that I've kind of detailed out for CutUp. But then I've also managed to transform some of my front end and some of the client side stuff such that I can also, once again, do some of the things that I like to do with .NET and show that .NET goodness. So that being said, with Ribbon, one of the things that you'll see, and I don't have a chart for this, is a client-side architecture that really takes advantage of MVVM and some of the things that we love about using .NET. And in this particular example, I'm going to show you a version of Ribbon that is still work in progress, but ultimately works using a combination of XAML as well as C#. And one of the things that it's kind of interesting about this one in particular is that it just makes the app a little bit better structured and easier to test. So in this example, we actually are leveraging Prism, which is a really awesome project that we should support. And you see in this particular example, we're actually also leveraging .NET Core and the NuGet support with Core that comes in the new .NET 2.0 library. So in this example, one of the things that I've implemented is a bootstrapper that leverages Ribbon, or that leverages Prism, and it does something a little bit different in the sense that whether you're developing for Android or whether you're developing for iOS, you can actually pass in what's called a platform initializer, because ultimately, although the code compiles to bytecode and will run in the VM for Java, and then for the iOS in the, what's it called? Well, it runs a little bit different. It kind of runs in its own kind of like VM. Ultimately, these systems and these apps, they still act very much like their native cousins. So an example of that is if we actually take a look at the iOS and the Android project, you'll see things that you're pretty familiar with as maybe an iOS developer, something like the app delegate class, right? And then, some of the namespaces that you're used to seeing with the Mac, such as, or while you're doing Xcode or Swift development, such as the UI application. And what's interesting about this is we're able to leverage pretty much Prism and dependency injection to be able to actually use that to start our application and leverage the same code. So in this example, with our app delegate, we're actually passing in a UI application, and this UI application has actually is going to implement a iPlatform. Where is it? It's going to implement either iPlatform initializer for the Android, and for some reason I don't seem to have it in this version for the iOS. But pretty much this is a common platform interface that both platforms will implement, and then we can actually just pass that in order to initialize our application. So there's also some other additional kind of like setup code, things like initting, the toolbar that you'll see. This is pretty standard on create methods in an Android app, that kind of thing. But ultimately, what this will now allow us to do is to leverage our MVVM code, which resides in these modules. So in this example, very similar to the architecture that we saw with our client or our backend and our server, we have a set of core classes, right? These classes don't take too many dependencies other than the ones that they need for, say, Xamarin Forms and for Prism, NunSoft JSON, for example. And then we have our other modules, such as our GIFs module, which will take a dependency on our core. And then we also kind of break it out into another module here, which is our kind of startup module, which once again takes a dependency on our core. So what we're doing essentially is building up to a set of pretty much libraries and DLLs that we can treat in an MVVM fashion. And in this particular example, we have one module that's specifically just for startup. And when we dive into that one, we have our view models table, and we also have our view models folder, and we also have our views. And in this example, it just does some really basic things, such as, you know, allow us to actually define within our XAML our commands as well as our bindings. So anyone who's familiar with MVVM or WPF development, this will look very familiar to you when we see something like the source and the binding that we see here. In addition to that, we've also in our code defined in our app.xaml a couple of different, well, not here. We've actually defined a couple different themes. These are going to be reused throughout the application so that we're not having to, you know, pretty much hard code and go back to change every screen. So with this, we got a couple of things that we're binding to, you know, certain things for the view. And then we also have, because we're leveraging the Prism library, the ability to connect to this using convention over configuration. So what we're able to now do is specify that we have a sign-up page, and this sign-up page has a sign-up page view model, right? And then the code that you see in here is going to look very similar to code that you would see if you were doing a WPF app or an app that's based primarily on XAML. Specifically, Prism has a class view model base which implements iNotify property change. Well, in this case, I think it's the bindable base is what implements iNotify property change. And what this allows us to do is now create our app using a common UI framework that ultimately will translate and be turned into the respective UI element on each device. Now, one of the things I would say about this is that's probably not that great if you have UI requirements that are very specific. You know, in that case, it may be better to actually do a native version of the UI. But even then, you know, Xamarin and some of the new .NET tools have got you covered. So in this particular case, though, what we've done is we've used the you know, the view model base to act as a kind of base class for our sign up page. And in this case, for sign up, we got a couple things that we would ideally want to do. We'd want to be able to go to our login and our sign up, and you can see we have commands for those. So these commands are then bound in our respective UIs. Where's the binding for this? Probably going to sign up, so login. Right. Some of the things we'll see that will look very familiar to a lot of folks is the ability to bind, say, our email, right, which would also bind to our email field here in our code view model. Where is the email? One of the things you'll notice for folks who have had some experience working with WPF is that a lot of the same conventions still apply, right? So we're still doing the set property, and we're raising, in this particular case, raise can execute change. But what that allows us to do is now be able to dynamically change our UI based on what's going on, right? Without having to write a lot of extra code that would be needed in order to do this on, say, a native platform like, you know, with Swift or with Java. So in this particular example, let me kick this off and get this running. And of course we have build errors, so let's try to figure them out together. Let's see what's complaining about. Does not like it. Model Android frameworks, rerun, get, restore. Really doesn't like that. So while that's running, one of the things I'll do is you can actually also connect, in this case, the Mac. And what we're doing here is we're simply connecting our machine to the Mac, because although we've managed to do this in C#, we still need to use a Mac in order to build and leverage the development tools that are provided by the Mac. So once that connects, we then have the ability to not only debug this on Android, but also debug this on iOS. And what's really cool and convenient about this is, once again, we're doing all our development in Visual Studio, tools that we're really cool and comfortable with, and then we're able to now say something like, for some reason we're having issues with the Android emulator. Let's switch over to the Mac. And what's really nice about this is it'll leverage the iPhone and the simulators that come installed on the device, and really kind of allow you to test your app using that. So in this case, switch to iPhone 10 simulator because that's what we currently have up. Let's kill the cut-up app that's currently running. Then let's get this running on the OS 10 device. So it can take a little while just because we're talking across the wire, but one of the things that I think is really cool about this when it works, right, is that your code is written in a way that's testable, right? All the best practices you have from, using view models and using MVVM, you can leverage again. And then in this particular case, once again, the code is written once, and when it works, the result's actually pretty awesome. Looks like it's taking a while to build, but one of the things that I wanted to share while that's happening was what this actually looks like on the device. So this code in particular is for kind of a V0 version of Ribbon that's yet to be released. And, oh, there we go. It built. What we can see is, for an app that's more or less a CRUD application, right? It's not too different than what we may see with the iOS device. Now, this one isn't as polished as, say, CutUp, for example, but it's really good for rapidly prototyping and just making an app that is super quick. So in this example, Ribbon is an app, and this is the welcome screen. So we'll go ahead to the login screen. And in this case, I'm already bound to some of the data. And I think for this, let's make sure that our endpoint is going to the right place. Okay, well, we don't have that endpoint. Yeah, let's give it a try. So I don't think this is pointing to the local. So this may actually be pointing to the dev endpoint in the cloud. But essentially, when we hit the login button, once again, we hit our breakpoint, leveraging, oh yeah, it looks like it's working. We hit our endpoint, leveraging conveyor. And in this particular example, we're doing something very similar to what we saw with the native iOS app, right? We're actually posting to our endpoint, which in this case, like I said, I'm not sure if it's pointing locally or to the remote machine, but looks like it did not like that and it crashed. But if it was pointing where it needed to point, what we would see is that the operation, the functionality is not too different than what you would experience with, say, an iOS device. And, I don't want to rat hole on debugging, but just know when it works, it's really awesome. Now, one of the things that, I think is really interesting is that this kind of like framework, these set of tools are powerful, not just because of how quickly they allow you to kind of prototype and build out an idea, but for me, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that the community and the projects and the things just keep getting better. So one of the things I kind of mentioned is that I'm not really that good at UI UX. And one of the things that I found that kind of helped me with this is a really cool company called, UX Drivers is the name of the company, but they have a platform that allows you to actually pretty much have your .NET and your, UI kind of like built out, similar to the way that they've done it before with ASPX. Now, what's nice about this is that the code is written in such a way that pretty much you're still working with Xamarin and you're still working with, XAML, but this really allows you to do something like, say, go to a hackathon and build something in a couple of hours that would normally take a while, depending on the platform and depending on your skill level. So in this next demo, one of the things that I like to do is kind of talk a little about another problem that I thought was a big deal and that I'm actively thinking would be great to solve by somebody or through a startup. And that's a problem that I face in my personal life specifically. I have my family, which is actually we have a lot of issues with regards to like health and blood pressure. And one of the things that you can see from these pictures, we all have the exact same smile. We got it from my mom. But one of the things that's not so obvious is, yeah, we do have issues with blood pressure, but we're not alone, right? There's approximately 32% of Americans have some kind of chronic condition. That's almost 1 in every 3 adults. So, for me, having this is, puts me at a stroke for heart disease, stroke, that kind of thing. Especially as the population continues to age, a lot of folks have to worry about is mom doing okay? Is dad taking his pills? And the idea for Glue, which is the current app that I'm talking about, is that I believe that there's a way that we can leverage technology to help families stay healthy together. So the idea for Glue came when I was thinking a little bit about growing up as a kid, having to take care of a digital pet. So how many folks in here have that experience, or their kids perhaps? Okay, cool. So it sounds horrible, but I had this idea. It was originally called Gigapa, right? And the idea behind it is that your grandpa or somebody would be able to, monitor remotely using this app, and combination of a caregiver. So the idea is that Glue is your family's own personal health Slack. Essentially, you use it, for notifications. You use it to kind of update when people are, taking their medicines. And the idea is that you take advantage of smart devices and IoT, right, to make it kind of like your own little AI buddy. So, what does that look like? Well, this is, my brother, myself, and say one of the folks who, did some of the designs you see here. But one of the things that I thought was really cool about this is that we were able to kind of go from, a demo that used just like a smartphone and a low-tech solution, right, to do just like pill tracking, right, making sure that when dad said he took his medicine, he actually took it. And, the idea is that the family would get kind of like a progress or weekly report, but then expand that, right, in about 24 hours during a hackathon that we did with Fitbit. Now, what's really awesome about the framework that I kind of mentioned, the Grail kit, is that, once again, this is one of your basic CRUD operations. You got a couple reads, you got a couple writes, you got a couple updates. But what we're able to do is actually within a span of 24 hours, leveraging that, we were actually able to build kind of like a proof of concept that just kind of shows the idea. So let me pull that up so you guys can get a feel for what this may look like someday if it ever really gets built out. So actually, Glue's on this one. Let's start over. So the idea behind Glue is you and your family can stay healthy together. And one of the things that's really cool with a combination of Grail kit and then also really just leveraging a new animation technology called Lottie is that you can put into really nice features and really nice things using all native.NET and XAML code. And in this case, the idea is that you sign up for the app, and then you can say what it is that you're interested in keeping track of. So in this case, whether it's blood, weight loss, or monitoring your blood glucose, you can use this app to kind of say that you're interested in that. And then you can add people to coach you, something like your brother or your sister, or as you can see, Dr. Dre is on our family list. And the idea behind it is that you as a family, right, can say that, hey, I'm really interested in monitoring my physical activity, my blood glucose levels, those kind of things. And using this app can actually connect your devices, connect your IoT devices to the system. So from here, if I save the changes, the idea and what we did during the hackathon, the 24-hour hack, was actually connected to a Fitbit that would then, monitor your activity so that if you and your mom were working out, you'd see your avatars working out together. Now, what's really awesome about this is, once again, you have to understand, I'm not a design guy, right? I'm not really great at putting these kind of things together. But what I am pretty decent at is actually working with XAML. And the code for Glue is very much structured like that other app you just saw, right? Well, actually, this is a little bit different because it was a hackathon, it was hacky. But once again, the idea is that you do have an Android implementation, you have an iOS implementation, right? But ultimately, these both just leverage the underlying app config, right? That's coming from your core project. So in this example, one of the things that's really nice about the GrailKit UI is that it actually has packaged a lot of the kind of things that you may want to tweak, such as the font size and the colors, right, in such a way that you can all modify that from, sorry, can you guys see this, by the way? Little? I've been talking this entire time, and this is probably really hard for you guys to see. Sorry about that. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay. Yeah, sorry, somebody should have said something. I should have asked earlier. So the idea is that, with the GrailKit, right, you're actually able to now modify your parameters, modify your things, and it just works, right? I think that's one of the things that's really awesome about this. In this example, I think that first screen that we were on, where is that welcome starter page? A lot of this will be familiar to folks who have seen or worked with XAML in the past. Essentially, what we've done is we've defined here a grid control, and this grid control has a couple rows. And those rows ultimately will contain other controls. So in this example, we have a grid defined here, and this grid then has in the first row the animation in question, right? Like I mentioned, Lottie is actually another really cool kind of development. I think it was created by Airbnb, and pretty much it allows you to kind of take your animation and serialize it into JSON, such that this is loaded in JSON, and you can put it in directly to your XAML. So in this example, we have our Lottie animation, and then we have our friend, the stack layout, which once again, if you've done some WPF development before, you'll be very familiar with, and you've probably used. So these are not currently on GitHub, but I can actually either make them available to you, and then also at the end, if you actually just add me on Twitter, I can definitely point you to it. That being said, though, this is one where it could totally go on GitHub. Great question. So this is awesome, right? Because this is a stack layout and a label, things we're familiar with, and then we're also doing a lot of the same stuff. We're binding, we're doing things that we've traditionally done in WPF and with our different kind of like tools and technology. And then what's awesome is I didn't tell this what it should look like on iOS, right? I didn't tell it what it should look like on Android. Essentially, that's where the Xamarin Forms comes in, right? That's where the .NET goodness happens. Essentially, we're able to take that kind of structure that we know that we've really kind of honed, and we're able to kind of connect it with what would potentially be a .NET backend or something that's also been written or coded up in .NET. So that being said, let me see, do we have time for any more? I don't know, I felt like I've showed you guys some pretty cool stuff. Let me see, what did I have here? Yeah, so, these are some of the things I'm currently doing, Glue, Ribbon. I got a couple other projects in the works that are also taking advantage of .NET. I think, if I got a couple more minutes, maybe like another 5-10 minutes. No, I'm done. Okay, cool. Well, that being said, pretty much, the last thing I was going to say is pretty much the world has changed, and although it's changed a bit, this is actually the high-level architecture for Emma. It's another app that I'm currently working on. And the only thing that's missing from here is the dependency injection, right, is wrapped in the API. But with the skills you know, with the experiences you've had, with maybe some of the things you've done just in your day job and your enterprise development, I think you could do a lot of really cool things. That being said, next steps for those who are interested. Recommended reading, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, Steve Jobs' books, and Shoe Dog. What I really like about all these books is they really kind of talk about just how a lot of these companies almost didn't come to be. So Hard Things About Hard Things is Ben Horowitz's book, and then obviously you know who Steve Jobs is, and Shoe Dog is another really good read. Also, for anybody that's interested in the business side, I highly recommend The Go-Giver, The Personal MBA, and The 4 Disciplines of Execution. And then, without being said, there's a lot of really cool tools that I'm going to have to make available to you guys at some point in time. Come find me. But, if you have any questions, please feel free to find me on Twitter and contact me. Thank you.
Also on the Meetup, you can put notes on.
And I could put it on Meetup, apparently. So, awesome. All right.
The Slack channel.
And the Slack channel. And we could do that. Yeah, I've been championing Slack all night, so why not? Awesome. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys for your time. I hope this is informative, and once again, appreciate the opportunity.
I hope you don't think I'm chasing you off.
No, you're good.
Let you go 10 minutes.
I know, right? Like, no, you're more than gracious.
No, he's finishing, and Rich is texting me from Thirsty Lion.
That's hilarious.
Thirsty. For past time. I think you have until 8:15.
8:15. Oh, okay.
It's pushing 8:30.
Yeah, let's definitely get going.
So I'll let you go over, not cutting it short.
Oh, that's fine.
Just want you to know.
Oh, okay, no, that's good.
Yeah, speaking of cutting it short, let's do this. We have gift cards. All gift cards have the same value, $25. So don't think you're going to take one gift card over another because it's worth more. We have 2 Thirsty Lion gift cards, 2 Known Amelia gift cards, 2 Legal Cinema gift cards. And then we have, thanks to Vanderhout, we have these tumblers of fun with prizes inside. And the prizes are like a pen or something, right? So nobody thinks it's going to be a color TV or something like that. That'd be good on cash. Okay, without further ado, let's call in some numbers. 408. 408. Going once, going twice.
Oh, that would be me, yeah?
Oh, come on down. Okay, the last 3. Exactly. 425. All right, now it's happening. Glad we waited, huh? Choices. Cards are $25. How about that? There you go. Legal cards went first. Cool. 441. 441.
Oh, yay. Good job.
Okay, I'll wait until I call the next one so you don't have to raise. So you don't have to raise. 435. 435. Way up there. Awesome. Oh, you got the envelope. There's lots of covering.